does that?
No normal human would do that to his own family.
There is no motive.
There were blood spat on his clothes.
What if something has happened to Carly?
The killer actually continued to maintain that she was alive.
And again, who does that? Like, who could live with themselves?
Hello, I'm Leila McKinnon, and this is Inside Crime. Tonight we look at the gruesome murders of two families who lived worlds apart. In an elite South African town, a privileged student snaps and brutally attacks his family with an axe. But first, the tragic double murder of a mother and daughter. For 5 years, the murdered mother's identity remained a mystery until a suitcase with the remains of her infant daughter was found 1,000 kilometres away. Both had been murdered by one of the most evil monsters Australia has known. The Belanglo State Forest in the New South Wales Southern Highlands is blighted by evil. Ivan Milat, the backpacker serial killer, made this place infamous.
One by one, the bodies were discovered until there were 7.
But he wasn't the only murderer who used it as a dumping ground. On a Sunday afternoon in 2010, a group of dirt bike riders are tearing through Belanglo. They veer off track straight into an horrific discovery: the remains of a young woman scattered in the bush. The bones presented detectives with a new mystery. Who did they belong to, and how did they get there?
These are the actions of a killer who was going to hide what he did, but at the same time appeared to enjoy the notoriety of it.
For the next 5 years, this anonymous woman remained just that: bones in the morgue. Then an unexpected breakthrough. 1,000 kilometres from Belanglo, by the side of a highway in outback South Australia, a motorist happened upon a nondescript suitcase. Inside was the body of a little girl. Now, the extraordinary police investigation that linked two separate crime scenes in remote parts of Australia with two anonymous victims. How detectives worked out it was all one crime: the callous murder of a mother and her baby daughter by a monster who thought he'd gotten away with it. Carly Pearce Stevenson grew up in Alice Springs, surrounded by loving family, including cousin Samantha and Aunt Sharon. It was the perfect place for a 20-year-old single mum to raise her 2-year-old daughter, Candice, or Candles as she was affectionately known.
She was a great mum right from the very beginning. She loved Candice. As soon as she was born, she was like, oh, look at this beautiful baby. This is my baby. I did this. And she had a heart of gold.
They were beautiful.
If Carly had a fault, it was that she was too trusting. It was a flaw the man she had fallen for, Daniel Holdham, was about to exploit. Right from the start, Carly's friend Tanya Webber thought something wasn't quite right.
Carly introduced me to him and he shook my hand. Nice to meet you. He didn't really look me in the eye. Nothing really stood out, except for I looked a lot older, and we sort of wondered what Carly was doing with him. Didn't like him. No, didn't like him at all.
But it was too late. In November 2008, Carly and little Candice suddenly left Alice Springs with the mysterious Daniel Hold'em.
The whole decision to leave town was a bit of a shock.
I'd always kind of known that it was something she'd always wanted to do, was to leave. But just how it all happened, it wasn't like there were no goodbyes or she just kind of left.
About a week or a week and a half after she left, she rang me up. She was crying. She just said to me that she thought she'd fucked up. She wanted to come home by the sounds of things. And I said, well, I can book a flight, I can pay for a flight, do you have money? No, you know, it's okay. And by the end of the conversation, she was sort of back to her giggly, laughing self. So I didn't think too much more of it.
And that was the last time she heard from Carly. As the weeks turned to months, Carly became a stranger to those she left behind. Calls to her phone went unanswered, and the family grew increasingly worried. At the end of 2009, a year after Carly and Candice had set off with Daniel Hold'em, and the last time they'd been seen, Tanya Webber and Carly's mum, Colleen, went to the police. A few days after Carly and Candice were reported missing, police reached Daniel Hold'em, who told them he was no longer in contact with them. They'd also noticed Carly's bank account was still being accessed. Then Carly's mother received a text from her daughter's number saying she was okay. And that was enough for police to close the missing persons report.
It shouldn't have been pulled, you know. We don't know if they'd actually seen Carly, viewed Carly. You know, on reflection, did they actually see her? Obviously not.
Police hadn't seen Carly or Candice because just weeks into their road trip, Daniel Hold'em had murdered them both. He'd taken Carly to the Belanglo State Forest, where he sexually abused and killed her, taking photos after he dumped her body and keeping them on his camera for years. A few days later, he murdered Candice and put her tiny body in a suitcase, eventually leaving it by the side of an outback road. But to cover up his crime, Hold'em had a sinister plan. He took over Carly's identity to make her family and friends believe she was still alive. The cruel facade allowed him to access her bank account and steal more than $70,000 of her money.
None of us had ever actually had a conversation to suggest that, what if something has happened to Carly? There was this assumption that, well, she's alive and obviously choosing not to have any contact with family. So there was mixed emotion. There was grief and loss, but there was a lot of anger around, you know, why? How could you do that?
The family was completely duped, and Hold'em must have thought he'd gotten away with murder. Even with the gruesome discovery in the Belanglo State Forest back in August 2010, nothing changed.
There was an immediate suggestion, of course, or questions asked, did Ivan Milat kill this person too? Was it another victim of Ivan Milat?
If anyone knows this infamous bushland, it's former detective Clive Small. He caught notorious backpacker serial killer Ivan Milat and saw the eerie similarities in this case.
It had the hallmarks of a Milat murder in some ways. The fact that there had been no attempt to bury the body, it had just been left off the tracks, off the vehicle tracks in the bush. The further the examination of the body went, the more it suggested it was a more recent killing.
While Ivan Milat couldn't be the murderer because he was already in prison, The New South Wales Police were stumped on the most basic questions. Who was the victim and who was responsible?
A T-shirt, skeletal remains, a few teeth, the only clues to a case that is now heading overseas.
We've made inquiries through Interpol, who are currently searching 190 different databases looking for records.
They had the body forensically examined, looking for DNA. They looked for missing persons. They looked for people who'd disappeared under suspicious circumstances, but actually got absolutely nowhere. One of the main reasons being was because the killer, which was a partner, actually continued to maintain that she was alive.
Held within my hands were her remains, and someone out there thought she was still alive in someone else's mind.
Susan Hayes is a facial anthropologist. Her skill is helping to identify human bones. And that's why the New South Wales Police turned to her after they discovered the remains of a young woman in the Belangolo State Forest. To find answers, she used the bones to develop a visual representation of the anonymous victim.
Every human that I'm working with, every human remain that I work with, I know they had a mother, they had a father, that they possibly had siblings, they had likes, they had friends, they had dislikes, they had dreams. You know, they were once a living person, they were everything that it is to be human. And that out there, beyond those walls, beyond the walls of the morgue, in someone's mind, this young woman was living and breathing and happy.
That young woman was Carly Pearce-Stevenson. Her family didn't know it at the time, but 20-year-old Carly and her infant daughter Candice had been murdered by a monster, Carly's boyfriend, Daniel Holdham. To avoid being caught, he'd assumed Carly's identity. It meant police didn't even think they were missing.
Had her face still been in the missing persons database, I strongly suspect that I would have flagged her with the police and said, look, this person's facial proportions are really matching the remains.
Despite the striking likeness of Susan's digital sketch, Carly's identity remained a mystery for 5 years. 5 years for Daniel Holdham to think he'd gotten away with murder.
The mysterious discovery of a child's bones in a suitcase on the side of a highway at nearby Wanaka.
Then the most unlikely breakthrough on a remote South Australian highway, 1,000 kilometres from the bones in Belangolo.
It's quite surprising when you see a road like this, yet you go for quite large distances without seeing any other cars or vehicles.
In July 2015, a passing motorist found an abandoned suitcase on the Karkonda highway near the tiny town of Wanaka. In it, he found a child's skeleton. Former homicide detective Clive Small says this is one of the most horrific murder cases Australia has ever seen.
I'm sure that even the police would not have expected to find what they did when they came here and inspected the findings and the body. The lack of information they had with it would have caused a very substantial South Australian inquiry.
Our focus at the moment is on gathering evidence and building a strong case.
This is one of the saddest cases that I have encountered. I've never, ever experienced the sort of outpouring of emotion that I did during this particular case.
The thought of a toddler discarded by the side of the road like a piece of rubbish still disturbs Michael O'Connell. He's the former Commissioner for Victims' Rights in South Australia and worked closely with police as they attempted to find out who the little girl was.
It was emotionally charging for them, and some of the police officers spent hours upon hours trying to, for instance, identify pieces of cloth by going through pages and pages of catalogues of junk mail. Other police officers door knocking.
And it deeply touched the former commissioner.
Still does. Still does.
And dumped her body in a suitcase on the side of a South Australian highway.
I don't think you would be a sensitive human being if a case like this didn't touch you.
We're still urging anybody with information to contact us.
Like the body in the Belanglo forest, detectives had no idea who the little girl was, so they appealed to the public for information.
Now, police have distributed posters to nearby businesses and have handed out leaflets.
Back in the Northern Territory, the reports caught the attention of Carly's friend Tanya Webber. She had no idea that she was about to crack the case.
I just had a feeling about it. I can't really explain what that was. And it wasn't until another story came out and they released some clothing. And for some reason it attracted my interest again. My husband walked through the door and I said, oh, this could be candles. And I was teary. I said, it could be candles.
Tanya followed her intuition. She called Crime Stoppers and gave the police a name, Candice Pearce.
I'm glad I called. Really glad I'm called. Yeah. What was to follow,
It was all the South Australian police needed.
That phone call changed everything, and it changed very rapidly. They've started with nothing, and they've gone to every innovative way they've been able to think of approaching it to follow it up and try and get leads and identify the body.
Police have revealed 20-year-old mother Carly Pearce-Stevenson and 2-year-old Candice were last seen travelling in a red or maroon-coloured 1986 VL Commodore station wagon similar to this at Cooper Pedy in November 2008.
With one name, 2 cases were solved and a cruel, sadistic crime spree unravelled.
And I just froze. I didn't believe it.
Samantha. Carly.
For 7 years, cousin Samantha thought Carly and Candice had wanted nothing to do with the family. But now, the hideous truth had been revealed, and with it, the calculated violence of Daniel Holdom.
I just didn't want it to be real. I didn't believe it. But it was heartbreaking. Still heartbreaking today.
What sort of person does that?
When police finally identified Carly and Candice, it was easy for them to also identify Daniel Holdom.
Easier still to find him. He was already in jail, serving time for sexually assaulting a 9-year-old girl. The then 41-year-old had an appalling rap sheet, which included a series of violent acts against women.
It's about him feeling he was in some ways like Malat, not the same, but some ways, where he felt all that activity was about him being in control. I'm the boss, I'm in control. I can fool everyone.
Holdom's former girlfriend...
But bizarrely, detectives discovered one more twist in this case. Back in April 2008, 6 months before he murdered Carly and Candice, Holdom had been the driver in a high-speed car crash that left his then-girlfriend, Hazel Passmore, in a wheelchair and tragically killed her 2 children. But despite her injuries and the heartache he caused her, Hazel and Holdem had reunited after the murders. Worse still, after seeing Holdem's images of Carly's dead body, Hazel continued to benefit from the theft of Carly's money.
Because she knew. She knew all along. And I know she's not the only one, but definitely went along with it. And again, who does that? Like, who could live with themselves?
She provided the crucial information the police needed to convict Daniel Holdem, escaping fraud charges of her own. A week before his trial for the murder of Carly and Candice, Daniel Holdem pleaded guilty.
Violating her in a most callous and sadistic way. He compounded this further when he took photographs of his unspeakable mistreatment, which he kept as a vile trophy of his own inhumanity.
He was sentenced to 2 terms of life in prison. No surprise, he has never shown any remorse.
This man not only took one human being's life, but he took 2, a mother, a child, 2. He stole their lives and he stole the opportunities that the family had to share those lives with them. And he did it in an abhorrent way. The lowest of the low is kind words, in my view.
It was a gruesome murder. Henri van Breda from South Africa attacked his entire family with an axe. But not everyone believes he committed the crime. The story of Henri van Breda's night of evil looked like a horror movie, but one big question still remains. Did his own family know they were living with a killer?
Stephen, what is your emergency?
Yeah. I need an ambulance. Lots of.
The ambulance?
Yes, please.
What's your name, sir?
Henri van Breda.
It's just after 7 in the morning in the affluent South African wine region of Stellenbosch.
And you, the patient?
No, my family is someone attacked my family.
Now, who is injured?
I think everyone.
Everyone in your house?
Everyone, 4 people, yes.
20-year-old Henri van Breda is calling for help.
What are the injuries?
Head injuries.
Are they conscious?
I don't think so. My sister's moving, but that's it.
Are there any suspects on scene?
No. They ran away.
With what were they attacked?
An axe.
And you need the ambulance to go to what?
Number 12, Horsker Street.
He's calm and in control.
G-O-S.
G-O-S.
Totally at odds with someone who's claiming he's just witnessed his family being attacked with an axe.
Unconscious, huh?
Yes, and bleeding from the head, please.
Incredibly, as his parents, brother and sister lay dead or dying, Henri spends more than 25 minutes on the phone with emergency services.
How long will the ambulance take?
It won't be too long. They'll send the ambulance out as soon as possible.
Crime in South Africa is not unusual, but even the police and paramedics who see it every day weren't ready for what was to come.
The moment you walk upstairs, you see the blood spatter and stuff, and then you think to yourself, what happened here? What went on?
Detective Sergeant Marlon Apollos has been a policeman for 14 years, and he was about to step into the biggest and most vicious case of his career.
To get a whole family axed dead to death, it is difficult. You wouldn't expect a crime like this to happen in a security complex in a place like Stellenbosch.
Yet that's exactly what happened. And perhaps most shocking of all was the notion that the enemy had been living in the family home. that Henri van Breda, a son and brother, did this.
With what were they attacked?
An axe.
He told me everything. He was very open. He was very honest.
Daniela Jense van Rensburg is Henri's girlfriend. She refuses to accept that the man she loves is a cold-blooded murderer and a potential psychopath.
But it's not something that at all crosses my mind.
And Henri's aunt, Lienta Nell, has vowed to support her nephew regardless of his guilt.
It could be that it's too terrible to contemplate. However, nothing in my mind can think that it was possible or reasonable. There is no motive in my mind.
The Van Bredas were well known to the community. 56-year-old Martin and his 55-year-old wife, Teresa du Toit, came from wealthy, well-established South African families. With their 3 children, Rudy, 23, Henri, 20, and daughter Marley, 16, this was a strong, Christian, tight-knit family.
I never picked up anything that there was a problem in the family.
The Van Bredas had lived in Australia for nearly 8 years, but in 2014 they moved back to South Africa, leaving sons Rudy and Henri behind to attend university. When they arrived in Stellenbosch, Martin, Teresa and Marley moved into De Zalze Golf Estate, a high-security, gated community with electric fences, CCTV and thermal cameras, 24-hour patrols and limited access.
She said to me, "This is safe, safe, safe in this gated community."
But it wasn't to be. On a hot summer's night on January 27th, 2015, the Van Breda family were together. Rudy and Henri were home from Australia. They had dinner together, and by midnight, everyone was in bed. But within hours, they were savagely attacked, which is why this case is so compelling.
The conception of people that it's happy families. Nasty things don't happen in good families or happy families.
It was the job of Cape Town prosecutor Susan Galloway to test the story as told by Henri van Breda.
Henri played an important role, either as a victim or as an accused or a suspect. He was on the scene. He lived through the whole sequence.
And according to Henri, in the early hours of the morning, an intruder broke into the house. The family was asleep upstairs, except for Henri, who was in the bathroom. Henri says he saw a tall black man wearing a balaclava, gloves and dark clothes go into the bedroom he shared with Rudy and suddenly attack his brother with an axe while Rudy was seemingly asleep in his bed.
That was the evidence of the pathologist and the blood stain analyst that he was attacked first. He was in his bed.
Henri says he cried out for help, waking his father Martin, who then came into their room.
The presumption is that the father then came in and tried to protect Rudy.
Henri, now out of the bathroom, says he was unable to move and instead stood watching, frozen with fear.
And then the mother and Marley came afterwards.
Sister.
Yes, the sister.
It was only then that Henri says he struggled with the intruder, whom he claims laughed as he wielded his axe.
He was a very lucky man with this axe-wielding attacker. In his version, the same attacker with the same intent using the same weapon, but the result is much different.
Henri says the attacker suddenly produced a knife, stabbed him, and then fled.
Bizarrely, Henri's first thought wasn't to call for help, but to instead call his then 16-year-old girlfriend, Bianca. She didn't pick up. Henri then says he passed out on the stairs.
Just after 7 in the morning, Henri says he regains consciousness and calls for help.
My family and we were attacked by a guy, an axe.
Was it an axe?
His sister Marley, on the brink of death, is rushed to surgery. The axe wounds she suffers are horrific and in deep contrast to Henri, who's treated for superficial cuts.
What was he like?
Like total calm. You would expect all that rage and stuff inside, but there was nothing. He was just calm. Is it possibly true? Can it be what he's telling me? Can it be the truth? Well, to me personally, I said to myself, no, this can't be. But I can't just say to you, no, you are lying. I have to prove it.
But someone who didn't ask for proof was Henri's girlfriend.
Did you ever say to Henri, did you do this?
No.
You never said to him, tell me, look me in the eye.
I did not do that to him, no.
The one person who has refused to believe Henri van Breda could murder his own family is his girlfriend. She is now his biggest defender.
You have never feared Henri?
No, I felt very safe around him.
Daniela met Henri after the murders at a cooking school where they were both enrolled.
Do you remember the first time you met Henri?
Yes, I was in an elevator at chef school. I think I asked him about Australia because he had an accent and he was always just talking about Australia. And he just told me a little bit about Australia and he was quite shy.
You had no idea who Henri was?
No, not at that stage, no. I found out through the internet. I saw an article and then I saw him and then I was like, oh, that really does make sense because he does not talk a lot about his family. I felt really heartbroken for him.
But within months of Daniela falling for Henri, he was officially charged with murdering his mother, his father and brother, and the attempted murder of his sister. Daniela was unfazed, unable to reconcile the man she knows with the man Henri was alleged to be.
What makes you so convinced?
Just knowing him, knowing how unable he is to hurt anything. He doesn't like seeing anybody or anything in pain. He honestly, he will rather be in pain just to help someone else out. He is very selfless. His story still always made sense to me with the lack of evidence.
Scratch marks.
Detective Sergeant Marlon and his team always felt Henri's story just didn't stack up, right from the moment he claimed an intruder broke into the family home. There was no breach of security. The house was clearly not broken into and nothing had been taken, and all the valuables were on the bottom floor.
Yeah, most of the valuables were down at the bottom floor. There was watches lying around, there was Teresa's handbag was downstairs on the table. Nothing was taken.
Henri played an important role, either as a victim or as an accused or a suspect. He was on the scene. He lived through the whole sequence. I don't know what blow followed what blow. I just knew he was coming at me with an axe, which I managed to take from him. He was able to give almost a choreographed version.
But perhaps the most damning evidence was that the knife wounds Henri suffered were in fact self-inflicted.
They were all very superficial. They barely broke the skin. They were uniform, so they were similar in nature. They had a similar appearance. It looked as if it could have been inflicted with the same weapon. So you can see the bandage. It's not blood-soaked.
Henri's injuries were analysed by forensic pathologist Dr. Marianne Temensma, who concluded that Henri had got off lightly considering such physical struggle.
He must be the luckiest man alive.
Anything can happen in a circumstance like that, so you can't really judge a picture just by looking at that.
Indeed, much of what doesn't make sense, Daniela puts down to Henri's recent diagnosis of epilepsy. She believes Henri's claim that he passed out that night for nearly 3 hours because he'd suffered a seizure, which she says impaired his memory and explains the many inconsistencies in his story.
Maybe things that I was previously a bit confused about absolutely made sense, yeah.
If one thinks about the rivulets of blood that dried on Henri's chest, those droplets didn't deviate. So if he had passed out, one would have expected the path of the blood rivulets to change, and that didn't.
Which means Henri passed out sitting upright. Forensic analysis of blood spatter at the crime scene and on Henri's shorts and socks further exposed his story as a lie.
For me, that was the cherry on the cake. His version of having stood inside the bathroom behind that door could not have possibly been because there was no blood spatter around that door, on the door itself, but there were blood spatter on his clothes. Socks, boxer shorts, it doesn't matter. You can't have the one and not the other. I think there was an argument during the evening. It was probably about something that's a long-standing issue in the family, and I think in his mind it built up to something more than it really was. It seemed to him the right decision to make, and to take out his anger on his brother. And once he started on that road, especially once the father found out what was going on, there was no way to stop, unless he was willing to admit that I had just killed my brother. It seemed to him the right decision to make, and to take out his anger on his brother.
3.5 years after the Van Breda family was brutally attacked with an axe, Henri van Breda received 3 life sentences.
Yeah, it was hard for me to hear that. It was hard to believe.
For Henri's aunt, Leanta Nell, hearing that her sister's son was the murderer was shattering.
Did you ever ask Henri if he did it?
No. I didn't think I could. I'm not bothered now whether he did it or not. I want to emotionally support him. The Henri that I know, nothing in the 19 years that I knew him led me to think that there's a danger in Henri.
And for Daniela, the sentiment is the same. She's only ever known Henri as a loving partner.
It feels so good to be writing to you. I feel like you're here with me and nothing helps me more than that.
Their romance continues. Only now, Daniela has to be content with letters of love from Henri, written from inside his prison cell.
But I love you so, so much, and I cannot wait to be able to look at you in the eyes, kiss you, and tell you so over and over again. It's lovely to hear about how much he loves me and how, like, he still, you know, feels the same way about me as he used to.
It is perplexing that the same young man who shows such deep love for his girlfriend is also capable of killing the ones who loved him most.
Because no normal human would do that to his own family.
One would like to think that there is something wrong with a person who does something like this, but unfortunately you just get people who... it's just plain criminality. We want to know that there's something wrong, because otherwise the possibility is there that each one of us are capable of something like this, and you don't want to believe that of yourself or the people you know and trust. Because of his youth, he didn't really think through the consequences of his actions. Not that he didn't accept it, but you're at that moment and you think, but this is, I'm so angry now, this is the only solution. If he is remorseful, he would have come forward and said, listen, I'm sorry, I did that. I'm sorry for the pain and the loss for the rest of my family. But he doesn't do that even. I think he's actually arrogant.
Perhaps the only person who could tell us who Henri van Breda is his sister Marley. But after suffering several axe wounds to the head, she has no memory of that night.
If there is a hidden silver lining about her trauma, then it is that she doesn't linger on. We don't discuss it.
Can you stay with a man who might have to spend the rest of his life behind bars?
Speaking for myself right now, I do say yes, but I don't know. It's hard to say that I will be able to forever, but yes, I do think so.